Good evening and namaskar. Please have a seat, ladies and gentlemen. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as Secretary General of the Indo-American Friendship Association, I have been given the pleasant task of welcoming all of you to a panel discussion, as you see, on World Today, to celebrate the 98th birthday of our senior most ambassador, Ambassador Maharajkrishna Rasgotra. I especially welcome Ambassador of Brazil, a good friend of India, and Madame Beatriz de Lago. I'm just welcoming you, Ambassador. Please come in. Friends, my name is Ajit Kumar. I'm a former Ambassador of India to the United Nations in Geneva. I have a request. The first request I'd like to make is to kindly put your cell phones in silent mode. As you know, today we have gathered for an important panel discussion by some of our most eminent panelists on the subject of World Today. To start the proceedings, I hand over to Ambassador Surinder Kumar. Over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Ajit. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Let us give a big round of applause to Ambassador Rasgotra. Happy birthday, sir. I call him the 8th wonder of the world. And by the time this program finishes, you will know why I do it and how apt is the description. But first, let me greet the chief guest with flowers. I will request Mr. Dev Mohan Gupta to present a bouquet to Ambassador Rasgotra. We can keep it with Dilip, I think. Let me say a word about Mr. Dev Mohan Gupta. He is one of our senior most members of IFA. He joined IFA in 2010. He has been a very great, generous supporter of IFA's activities. He has supported us today, he has supported in the past. As you know, IFA is not a Sarkari think tank. We don't get funds from the Indian government. We don't get funds from corporate sector. We don't get dole out from the US Embassy. Actually, I have not taken a single penny from the US Embassy in the last 12 years. So we depend entirely on the generosity of our members like Mr. Dev Mohan Gupta. Earlier, Mr. Bodh John, who couldn't join here, he always supports us. So thank you, Gupta ji. Keep on supporting us in future also. There are many in this audience who have known and worked with Rasgotra ji much, much longer than I have. Basically, I have spent just 17 months with him, but they changed my entire approach to diplomacy. Diplomacy is not only making thick notes with all the statistics and graphs, talking points, and all what goes with this. We learned from him diplomacy means having connectivity, which Modi ji talked, connectivity with whom? Connectivity with the top leadership. You should have access to the top leadership. You should have access to the opinion makers. You should identify, nurture those who influence opinion, and also by the parliamentarian, academics, or business community, Indian diaspora, who can nudge and influence policies which are in the interest of India. Mr. Rasgotra, Ambassador Rasgotra, accomplished all this without seeming to do it. In his own style, he is an institution. Just to watch him in action, you can learn a lot. In 17 months, I learned so much that in for next 16 years, which I served as Ambassador High Commissioner, all those things really stood me in good stead. Now, I will give you one little instance. Sometimes you feel how naive you are and how little you know how to handle complex issues. Now, 17 months, the Iron Lady Margaret Thatcher, the Prime Minister of UK, she attended 5 functions of the High Commission in 17 months, a record itself. We had a panel discussion like this after she unveiled the bust of Indira Gandhi in the India House. And on the panel we had Ambassador Rasgotra was chairing it, Margaret Thatcher, Michael Foot, Sunny Ramphal, Kathleen Rain, and some other people. Now, thanks to this visible access to Prime Minister, many High Commissioners, ambassadors are very envious of him. So one day in the popular Evening Standard of London, I read a gossip column news item which said, Indian High Commissioner Maharajkrishna Rasgotra has been having an affair with the British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. As a young diplomat, I was very enraged, and whole night I kept on drafting the letter of rebuttal, using strongest level. We are dismayed, we are outraged, we are disgusted, all kind of strongest language. So next day I told the PS, as soon as High Commissioner comes, I must see him, I have something urgent. So he told, please come. So I went in with the Evening Standard, my hand buzzed, and he looked at me and he, so Mr. Counselor, is something bothering you? I said, yes, sir. I said, sir, did you see this? I thrust this paper. He read and he, yes. So, sir, this letter of rebuttal should be signed by me or by DHT or by you. He said, what? Letter of rebuttal? For what? It says rumor. Even if it's rumor, I will take as a huge compliment. And he added, young counselor, if any rebuttal has to come, it has to come from 10 Downing Street, not from India House. To the best of my knowledge, till today, no rebuttal has been issued by 10 Downing Street. You can draw your own conclusions. Well, there are many things. You see, normally when you have senior persons, they are very dismissive of the young officer suggestions. I was advised internal relations with Intech for 1 year, and I was the retired person, but youngest, because all the 6 IS officers were senior to me by 15 and 10, 15 years, and whatever I will say, they say, forget about it. This is nothing. This is nothing. I used to feel very frustrated. I said, unless you listen, how do you feel? But Mr. Rasgotra is totally different. If you have good idea, I encourage you to hear it. He knows that I befriended the chief editor of London Times, Charles Brown, and Rajesh is here. Once we went to his office in Dockyard, and he opened the costliest champagne bottle, and then not only that, the editor showed us around. Normally, we do other way around. It is the chief editor who took us to Savoy Grill and always gave a sumptuous dinner, which is, so I wanted to send the chief editor to India. And I was corresponding with XP division for more than 3 months. They said, no, we don't give any passage to the fellows coming from UK. He's rich, his paper is rich, he can afford. We give only passage to only African countries. So I was very tired. One day I went to him, he said, Mr. Counselor, what can I do for you? I said, this is the problem. He said, sit down. He, in my presence, asked me to connect with Civil Aviation Secretary. And he says, here, Krishna Rasgotra here, my counselor is sitting here. He wants to send the chief editor of London Times to India. It's a great paper, great idea, and we support. So do one thing. Give return passes, first class, 3 days, hospitality in Delhi. Then I said, sir, if you don't Delhi, you should go to Bombay. Okay, 3 days in Delhi, 2 days in Bombay. Sir, if you're going to Bombay, you should go to Goa also. So he said, look, 3 days in Bombay, 3 days in Delhi, 2 days in Bombay, 2 days in Goa. Then he said, sir, he can't go alone. His wife should also go. So he said, look, my counselor is very greedy. So let me repeat it. Deal is return fare, first class, Charles Brown, his wife, 3 days in Delhi, 2 days in Bombay, 2 days in Goa, all 5-star hotels, pick up everything on the house, they should be looked after very well. Whole conversation took 3 minutes. I was wasting 3 months. This is how he works, this is how you learn where diplomacy goes. Now the topic today is World Today, so I should really say something when you have one NSA there. I think we have 3 or 2 retired Deputy National Security Advisors here. We have Rasgotra Saab, we have Professor Raja Mohan, we have Sanjay Joshi ji. So I can't anything add very new. But to me, today's world looks like the world of Mahabharata. So Mahabharata gave you Gita, but it was what was this world? It was the most fratricidal war. Brothers cheating brothers, trying to get your kingdom, brothers trying to disrobe your sister-in-law. You are using deception, you are using every trick in the game just to win. At the end of the day, what did you do? You destroy each everybody. Now today's world, there's no all. You have lectures. The summiteers do summit. They talk about democracy. They talk about human rights. And then what we do? Be the so-called great advocate of democracy, human rights, get the government of terrorists installed in Kabul. They leave the Afghan women to the Taliban vultures. The images you saw when Taliban was coming to Kabul, the Afghan people trying to running behind the American plane to hang on to the wings of the plane. We have seen that. We have seen what happened in Ukraine. You have these summits, they talk about be a firm commitment to uphold the sovereignty, territorial integrity, human rights. But they don't have courage to use one word, condemn invasion. No, it is strategic interest. Nowadays, everything is you are strategic autonomy. You wait Afghanistan, strategic weight. Taiwan, strategic ambiguity. I think we should have a strategic hypocrisy because you say something and then you really don't do it. But if you look at last 3 years, what is the image we have? Image of COVID-19. We have seen in New York, bodies, cops piling, nobody claiming them, people standing queue to get the lunch boxes there. We have seen second wave in India. We run out of wood in the cremation ground, we run out of oxygen. And today, we must, humanity, the whole world can compliment itself that we have endured, survived, overcome it. This is really great compliment. There are many flaws, but thing is, who could have imagined 2 years back we will be sitting again and really talking like this or be traveling at normalcy. So I think human endurance, but other side is that we have been seeing that even these big pharma firms, they can't give waiver for IPR for vaccine. Otherwise, African countries will get vaccine much cheaper. But no, they are not giving this. We have all kind of things which we have. We have visits of Pelosi and the parliamentarian going to Taiwan. What they've achieved? Whose interests are serving? You create more tension. So I don't know. To me, this world is, Shankar, my friend, the former NSA says, it's a confused world. I talked to Rasgotra the other day, is it confused? He said, the world is not confused, we are confused. He said, we can't figure out, the world is not confused, the world is there. What I'm saying is that, look, all kind of thing in the national interest. I will give an example. You can live, you can continue buying discounted oil from Russia. You can go on buying all the defense. You can continue all the cooperation. At the same time, why shouldn't we be able to say to them that, look, what you are doing is right. And I will give one example. There was somebody, the Prime Minister, not Congress, the BJP Prime Minister called Atal Bihari Vajpayee. He's the man who gave the phrase, India, US naturalized. He's the one who said it. Clinton came here 2000, March 2000. You saw infrastructure, whole passage in institutional cooperation started from there. But when US invaded Iraq, somebody who was in PMO, he's sitting here. I will not give his name. He told me that the Deputy Prime Minister of that time, the NSA of that time, and EAM, all three were in favor of supporting US invasion. And this poet Prime Minister told in typical Hindi style, आपके साथ अच्छे संबंध बनाना चाहते हैं, पर हम गलत काम में आपका साथ नहीं दे सकते. And he is the Prime Minister who got the parliamentary resolution passed condemning invasion of Iraq. So we should have some flexibility somewhere. I won't talk much because I have taken more time than I normally do. One only thing is that I personally feel if you just analyze what bottom line is what. The whole world has abandoned Gandhi. Gandhi's philosophy, noble goals to be pursued with noble means. No, nobody bothers. They have all embraced Sankar's friend Deng Xiaoping for China, who said, so long as the cat catches the rat, it doesn't matter which is black or white. That is what is happening world over. You serve your method, doesn't matter what means you are using, what aim you are using. World to me is in chaotic world. I don't know what I'm saying makes any sense. Well, there are many people who will tell wisdom and will figure out for us. Thank you guys for listening to me. I now hand over to Rasgotra ji to conduct and chair this discussion. Thank you.
Ambassador Surendra Singh, I want to thank you for organizing this wonderful gathering where I see many of my cherished Foreign Service colleagues, other friends. Particularly, I am honored by your presence, Ambassador, and Beatrice's presence here. I recognize many, many, many faces here. And I want to thank you in particular for the stories you have invented. You are a great novel writer, potentially. Write one now. So many things to say, but I think I should wait for my time. One thing, Surendra, while I thank you for this, I think you made a mistake. I am determined to hit a century. So you can write another novel for that occasion. Thank you very much, all of you coming. Thank you very much, Mr. Gupta in particular, and my friends here, Raja Mohan, Shiv Shankar, Menon, Joshi ji, and of course my friend Ambassador Surendra Singh. Without saying anything more, I think we'll proceed with the program because there is time allotted to me. I had other things to say. I'll do that later on. So we have the first speaker, Raja Mohan. Now, our first speaker violated the time limit, so you can also go ahead and repeat it.
Good evening to all of you. It's really a special privilege for me to be part of this celebration of Mr. Rasgotra's century to be, and really let me start by congratulating you on your birthday and wishing you many, many happy returns. What I thought I'll do in the 10 minutes that I have, being reckless and glutton for punishment, I mean, let me focus on a subject that we've constantly obsessed in this country, which is alignment. Alignment, anti-alignment, non-alignment, multi-alignment. If you look at the last 7-8 decades, I mean, of Mr. Rasgotra's life, 90 years, that the fundamental question of how you deal with the major powers and the relationship, in that sense, thinking about great power relations, which is one of the core elements of international affairs, that it is the nature of the relationship and the shifting dynamic between the major powers that sets the rules for the international system. I mean, going back to the Congress of Vienna, to today, what the major powers do sets the terms for broader relationships around the world. But if you go back to the interwar period when Mr. Rasgotra was born, and see from there, I mean, how many times the major powers have shifted in their partnerships, between their coalitions, even just within few years. When Nazi Germany and Soviet Union were buddies for a short while, then Soviet Union became a friend of the West, got Lend-Lease agreements to fight Nazi Germany. So you've seen, dramatic shifts. But yet our discourse somehow believes there is a constancy to great power relationship. And that constancy might be, so therefore our own approaches must be constant. So I think that is the part of the problem, I believe. I mean, how we think about this very core idea of how do we deal with the great power relationships. So my sense is that I think if you make a mistake of how to deal with a shift in the major power politics, let's start with the interwar period. Again, I'm quoting controversy. I mean, if you go back to how India dealt with the Second World War, you had the national movement split into three broad camps, you could say. One which said, I can work with Japan and Germany to throw out the British. Another which said, actually, it is an inter-imperialist war and that we have nothing to do with this. We're going to stay, we're going to, because the Soviet Union was aligned with Germany, so that was the communists. The both aligned with the other Axis powers. And the Congress said we are non-aligned. So we are opposed fascism, but we're not going to support the war effort. Quit the governments. Jinnah got upper hand at that point of time and essentially did not support the war mobilization. In the end, it was only the communists who supported the war mobilization. So the outcome of it, I mean, it's a long story short, is India had no say in the post-war outcomes of how the world was ordered because India was not part of the, victorious side, at least the mainstream Indian political parties were not part of it. So therefore, the judgments made about the war, the nature of who might win, who might lose, the nature of, it was a difficult moment, it was a period of fighting colonial empire, and the judgments we made, so it's not a question of criticizing one party or the other, but the consequences of the choices that we made in the interwar period had profound effects on the territoriality of the subcontinents, its division, and the nature of its relationships, which continues to endure with us. So therefore, how we deal with the major power relationships, I think, is a critical one. And I think today, just reading the meeting between Xi and Putin this evening, I mean, Putin has said, we're going to be a tandem, we're going to operate in tandem to shape the future world order. Tandem is a bicycle, you know that. It has two wheels, two pedals. So the idea that China and Russia are going to build a new non-Western order and shape the future of the international system. So, but of course, the size of the two wheels are going to be different. The nature of the pedal power is going to be different. But yet, the notion, what we're hearing today, is a fundamental shift that is taking place. And therefore, how India deals with this, the new constellation of major power relations that is beginning to unfold, is going to shape a lot of other things that we do in the days ahead. So my sense is what we do, at least three broad features. I mean, I think in contrast to the traditional debate in terms of how we should deal with the major powers. One, India's relative weight among the major powers has grown. It was not the situation in 1947, that our relative weight in the international system has grown because of our economic strength, that today it has taken us 75 years to do $3 trillion. But my sense is in the next 10, we'll at least be adding $4 trillion. What happens inside is a different story, but the fact is the weight of India in the international system is going to grow. So how we deal with the other powers is going to be fundamentally different from how we thought about the nature of the relationship between the other powers and what its consequences for us are. The second big change, I think, is the geography of the distribution of the powers. As long as the US and Soviet Union, or the European wars that took place, Japan was the exception, these were distant forces that were operating, and it was relatively easy to navigate between them. But today, the second largest power is next door. It's rarely that India had the experience of having the world's most powerful, one of the world's most powerful nations as your neighbor. In fact, it was India that, under the British at least, radiated power outside to the neighboring world around us, in the Indian Ocean, in the inner Asian region. But today it is China that's going to radiate power. So how we think about the relationship between the powers is going to be fundamentally defined by the fact that China is our neighbor. China is the second largest economy, second largest military power, and going to be soon the largest economy if things go according to track. So therefore, this is again a hugely different condition than the condition we had faced before, where the US and the Soviet Union were the main powers, and the choice was of how to navigate between them. Finally, I would say India is also a different country in a way that it is a global country today, in a way that it was not. That your footprint, surely your diaspora footprint, is today so wide, and most of it is in the West. In fact, most of it is actually in the Anglo-Saxon world, and the nature of that relationship that between India and the West has profoundly altered, which none of us acknowledge, or it is not something right thing to say, but the fact is, facts are on the ground. Our trade with Europe, US, and Britain, and the other Anglo-Saxon world today is the number one factor. Second, the diaspora, most of it, as I said, is in the Anglo-Saxon world. But yet, we have problems with them. But the fact that, unlike in the past, when we turned to the Soviet Union to balance China, if Russia and China are a tandem, to use Putin's words, how we do that, deal with the balance of power in our neighborhood, is going to look very, very different from the one that we've done before. So I think this is, but what is the positive side of it is, as I said, we are a much bigger country in terms of economic size, and that this gives us leverage in terms of dealing with the world in front of us. Unlike in the past, where we had to be defensive, we had to be carefully navigate between those. But today, the size and the agency that the size gives, I think gives us a lot more options. And I think, therefore, my sense is that India that is confident and is willing to play the great power game. I mean, I think, unlike in the past, I mean, it was said India was the linesman in a football match, always calling foul, offside. But we are in the field now. Use the Brazilian ambassador can't avoid a football metaphor. So we are in the field, so you are kicking the ball, you have elbows. So I think this is a very different India in a very different field that we are playing, not running along the sidelines and saying offside. So this, I think, for the next generation of people who make foreign policy, I think this must be a lot more exciting period than the difficult challenges that we had to surmount in the last 75 years. Internal divisions, conflict within the subcontinent, the numbers, I mean, that the suffering, the difficulties that we faced in a bipartisan way, we've come a long way. But my sense is the best is yet to be. While the world is very different, India also is in a much better position to deal with this new world, in a world in which, in the end, we can leverage the external world to make the lives of our people better, because $2,000 per capita still, you can't run away from it. You might be the third largest economy, but still doing things to make your people's lives better. That, I think, if that is the objective, I think our opportunities are a lot more. So I'll stop here. Once again, thank you.
Thank you, Raja. You have already spoken half my speech. Thank you for that. So I won't have to repeat too much, especially on non-alignment and alignment. I think we are on the same page on that. Mr. Joshi is next. He was my patron, provider of my living expenses in the Observer Research Foundation, which is, I think, India's #1 NGO today, known all over the world. You are not going to reveal my secrets? Huh?
I have none like that. I have been your student, you have not been.
I cannot express what an honor it is for me, sir, to be here today for your 98th birthday celebrations organized by Ambassador Kumar. So thank you, Ambassador Kumar, for allowing me this privilege to be here amongst you all and amongst this galaxy of stalwarts assembled here. Raja's Act is always a very difficult act to follow. But, I actually learned I did not know anything about international relations until I met Ambassador Rasgotra. I was schooled in international relations by him at the Observer Research Foundation. And the Observer Research Foundation was something which he helped create, he helped build. And whatever happens today, I hope we, sir, do live up to the standards you set up for us. That is what we attempt to do, and I promise you, we shall keep on trying to do the same. Today's talk is really about the state of the world today. World today is the topic. I'm actually reminded of Ambassador Rasgotra's book. I learned my international relations from you, so I will keep on referring to your book. This is A Life in Diplomacy. And 1982, when Ambassador Rasgotra had freshly been appointed Foreign Secretary, and Mrs. Gandhi, you recall the incident in your book, asked him, now, what are your priorities, Secretary? What are you going to be doing? And he says, now the problem today is diplomacy status. People are not talking to the countries. Countries are not talking to the countries they have problems with. And primarily, if you look at the world today, I think that is fundamentally the issue which we see around us. That diplomacy as such, the mode of diplomacy, the context of diplomacy has completely altered. I mean, global leaders today don't talk to each other, they talk at each other, and most of the talking at each other happens on public platforms like Twitter. And war and diplomacy both are conducted on the trenches of Twitter, rather than allowed the space to be able to operate and have conversations. And we've seen this unfold very rapidly over the last few years. So when you get into public platforms, then what you get into are theatrics. You do not get into actual diplomatic space to find solutions to problems, yes, which are going to be there, to find solutions, answers to issues. Now, yes, 2020, Ambassador Kumar said, was there. It came as a big rupture. Everything was hit. Growth was hit. Economy suffered. And then just as, we were hoping to recover from the effects of the pandemic, comes February the 24th. And this particular, violation of the UN Charter, when Russian armies marched towards Kyiv, actually unleashed the perfect storm, only to make matters far worse from what they were in 2020. And in the 2 years between 2020 and 2022, we have actually moved forward 2 years only to go progressively back. In some things we've gone 20 years back, and some things we've got 30 years back, and some things we've got 50 years back. Now, we've seen an unraveling happen at such a rapid pace that today it is extremely difficult to really uncover the contours of the kind of situation which we are facing ourselves with. But the fundamental thing is that within the last 30 years, we saw the end of the Cold War, we saw a lot of things, we saw détente happen in the Kissinger days between China and Russia to counter China and the US to counter Russia. The project succeeds. But the project succeeds only today now to push us back. Those same 50 years, where some months ago, we were talking of a new Cold War between the US and China. And on 24th February, we again managed to resurrect the ghost of the Iron Curtain, and we draw it right across the heart of Europe. So what has been happening? It is one thing to say, okay, there's great power politics operating, but there's also another way of looking at it, that in many ways, the function of agency has actually got over these years much, much, much more diffuse. And in the tortuous effort to make themselves secure, the way things unfolded, both sides have become victims of their worst insecurities. And that is what really unfolded through these years. So what we are finding ourselves is in a kind of paranoid, schizophrenic world in which we are seeing every possible weapon being used. On the one hand, we find platitudes being mouthed about the rules-based international order when every action subverts the very tenets of the international order which was built over the last 70 years. So which way are we headed? And the paranoia actually is such that it is not just declared foes. Even allies are found to be quietly, surreptitiously reassessing their options, looking elsewhere and trying to hedge their bets. It is not just that countries like India are hedging their bets. There are lots of other countries also hedging their bets around. And these are allies hedging their bets. I'll talk about it later. But given the situation, the kind of collision of crisis, as the IMF calls it, what is actually hit the world today, it is actually the collision of crisis, which is unfolding a situation where the global funding environment has turned completely adverse. And given the state of distrust between leading powers today, given the state of distrust, the shockwaves of the multiple tsunamis, first COVID, then the war in Ukraine, then the sanctions, and not just the sanctions, the effort to use finance flows as a weapon, break down the entire banking system to use SWIFT as a weapon of war, and completely stop transactions. Now, these are very, very heavy weapons which have been used. And these are weapons which there is no Geneva Convention for. They take lives of innocents, but there's no Geneva Convention which regulates their use. So, foremost in the minds of countries which are today in the emerging world, in the emerging economies, there are three things which they're really worried about in this situation. So if there is ambiguity in stance, there are reasons for that ambiguity in stances. Foremost in the minds of these countries are three things. To what extent will the G7's preoccupation with defeating Russia and containing China impact, first of all, completely and disrupt the global economy? And that is primary concern number one. Second, put paid to a very fragile economic recovery which was taking place after COVID. And third of all, undermine all action which we have been taking over the last so many years, whether it is climate change, whether it is sustainable development goals, just completely throw them out of the window. There are no resources left to do any of these things. Now, many countries like India actually import, and Europe also does, imports this inflation from outside. It imports it primarily in the form of energy prices for all the energy it consumes. And the difference is that while the OECD has far more headroom to be able to today subsidize its population, give out doles to take care of the complete disruption which is happening in the energy markets, India, a country which actually has both subsidies and taxes on the same items because it is doing redistributive justice on the basis of these, today finds it does not have the bandwidth to do either. It can neither afford to give subsidies, nor can it afford to actually raise finances for taxation to where prices go. So there are serious headwinds which countries face. We've seen the effect of these headwinds in Pakistan. We've seen the effects of these headwinds in Sri Lanka around us. So as we struggle in this very, very new world, let me just briefly conclude with some of the challenges and some of the points of the situation which I've just described. See, first of all, the challenges to democracy across the world. Given the kinds of challenges democracies across the world today are facing, including the United States of America, it is a troubled democracy. And the kind of polarization you see in the United States of America is something which has Americans really worried. And this kind of polarization you're seeing across all democracies. You're seeing it here as well. Now, given the kind of trouble democracies today are in, posing the entire discord and struggle as a binary choice between a kind of rules-based democratic system of order and fighting a very authoritarian system which is completely rules-based is the wrong framing of the problem at all. And as the deeply flawed nature of democracy shows us, the onslaught of political ambitions combined with the kinds of technologies we have in hand today have ensured that the contours of this divide are no longer as clear. Now, democracies have a lot to answer for in this debate. Second, given the enormity of the economic crisis facing many fragile economies, the need to have coordinated fiscal and monetary adjustments across countries, like what happened after 2008 in the aftermath of 2008, becomes even greater. But the willingness to do that is today completely missing. We do not find that kind of willingness. So the problem is that if instability spreads, you're going to have many, many more ungoverned spaces in the countries around you. Now, how do you handle those ungoverned spaces? Because those ungoverned spaces are right for another version of globalization, which comes in the form of global jihad. So those ungoverned spaces are going to go on increasing in this kind of situation. So that is why when we start talking of assistance to vulnerable populations, it is not about humanitarianism. It is actually about your own stake, whether it's Afghanistan, whether it's Sri Lanka, to find resources to assist countries which kind of submerge, which go under, becomes an absolute imperative. And given this kind of headwind, the third thing which happens is, even as countries turn protectionist, even as countries start looking more and more inward, they are going to be even more desperate, first of all, to contain the economic fallout of all that is happening within their borders, or even to find new engines of growth. So in this kind of situation, the new protectionism, which is actually pushing politics to the center of a lot of economic decision-making overtly, not, if you start looking at statements, that is what seems to be happening. It is political decision-making which is actually guiding where sanctions are imposed, what is to be done with what country, what kind of trade relations we're going to have. But beneath that, if you start looking below the surface, you find that when the Emiratis are given the choice and have to make a choice between choosing F-35s and 5G, their choice is obvious. In the interest of growth, they chose 5G. They said, sorry, we are not interested in F-35s for the point of moment. And the same kind of conversations you find across Saudi Arabia, across a lot of the Gulf states, Bahrain. They are all, yes, hedging their bets. They are all looking elsewhere. So where does this take up when we start, just to conclude this? Now, I spoke, we are in a situation where there's a disconnect between geopolitical ambitions and what is happening in the world of geoeconomics. There's a deep disconnect today, for reasons which I can't go into here. And security-led efforts, which we are seeing today, to draw kind of red lines across the innovation landscape, to draw red lines across the world of finance, to draw red lines across all kinds of standards, whether it's standards for technology and those kinds of battles which are taking place across the world today, are pushing to create and accelerate, in a way, alternate modes of trade and commerce which are taking place. It's happening parallelly all the time. It keeps on happening. Now, how far this succeeds today is extremely difficult to tell. And it's difficult to tell for various reasons. But what they do is two things. First of all, they are making globalization itself a very contested space. There are different versions of it. Raja spoke about it, the Chinese version and the Russian version, with both are driving around in tandem. They're also talking about globalization. And there is the other version which says, okay, get these out. We have our own version to do it. What this does is, the second thing, should these kinds of disconnects persist, something else happens. There are massive opportunities for arbitrage and profits, which exist at multiple points between these two versions. And to conclude, I'll just give you an example. Think of it. Why, when there's slowdown in China today, the economy, because of COVID shutdowns, has actually been struggling, and therefore demands should be falling, demand for energy should be falling. We find that LNG demand in China, LNG, shoots up by 50%. It's a huge jump. And LNG is getting re-exported. And where is it getting re-exported to? Right into Europe. Where is it coming from? From Russia. So, on the surface of it, there are sanctions being imposed on Russian LNG getting out. On the other side, Europe is paying 10 times the price for the gas it would be paying otherwise, and that was piped gas which was coming into Russia, from Russia into Europe, which was far cheaper. on long-term contracts. They're buying spot LNG at 10 times the price. A lot of arbitrage, money being made. That's what I mean. When these two systems kind of fragment and collide, these are the kinds of opportunities which arise. And they play havoc with the best laid plans, with the best laid intentions of what is to be done. So this is the kind of world which we are actually living in. This, I would say, is the kind of revenge of geoeconomics which takes place. So while we start talking about which way the world order is going to turn, what is going to be happening to it, yes, there are shifts taking place. There are a lot of changes which are going to be taking place around it. The point is, who are the parties who are going to be negotiating? We do not really know, because there are many other fish in the pond. And there are many other forces at work which are playing this orchestra. There are sounds which are muted, which are going to get louder and louder and louder. So which way this worm is going to turn is still up for the grabs. Thanks.
Thank you, Joshi ji, for your remarks. A very comprehensive, diverse. Mr. Joshi is a very good economist, but his specialty is energy, various aspects of it. And you would gather from these remarks that you've made covering various aspects why ORF is thriving. God bless you. Ambassador Shankar Baner.
Let me begin by joining everyone else in congratulating you, Ambassador Rasgotra, and look forward to the next celebration in 2 years from now. You look around the room, you can see the respect, the affection in which you're held by so many of us. But not just so many of us, I mean, people of all ages here, which is really quite remarkable. That's not something that you can put together very easily. For people like me, I mean, you've always been an inspiration, a mentor. I mean, the one person who I used to meet regularly and ask for advice when I had a job which meant doing something was Ambassador Rasgotra. And I always learned something about what we should be doing. And something practical, something that actually worked. And for the younger diplomats, and at 73, I can say younger in his presence, right? Thank you for giving me that opportunity to use the word younger. But at that, really, it is amazing how many of us you have mentored and seen through our careers. For me, that is really his great achievement. It's a greater achievement, I think, than even having a story about you and Margaret Thatcher in the newspapers. But we're supposed to be discussing the world today, and I think much of what has to be said has been said. Let me just say a few words about what I think the world is like today, and then actually how I actually think this is a world full of opportunity for India. That this is a moment this may be our moment if we do the right things. I mean, that, of course, is a big if, but that's a separate argument. I'm not sure I describe the world as confused. No, for me, this is a world adrift between orders. Why do I say between orders? Because frankly, the last time the international community responded in any coherent manner to transnational or international crises was 2009, the London G20, which responded to the global financial crisis and did something about the banking system, about preventing a Great Depression, saved us. But after that, COVID, pathetic what we did. I mean, lots of acronyms meeting, G20, G7, you name it. But what did the international system do? You look at the developing country debt crisis. I mean, the IMF is saying that 53 developing countries today run the risk of debt default, serious risk of defaulting on their debt. What do they do? Nothing. What has the international community done? We've been talking about it in all these groups for the last 4 years. We as India have actually raised it. So for me, this is not a coherent international order There is no accepted ranking of either priorities or of powers, but this is normal because great power rivalry, as we know, and as Raja has reminded us, is the norm. We might have been lulled into forgetting about it when we had a unipolar moment after the Cold War, and because we all read English, we tended to believe some of the stories we were told. But that apart, the fact is that if you look right through the 20th century, 19th century, great power rivalry is normal. This is the business of diplomats and soldiers and scholars, and this is what at least IR depends on. So today we're back to a norm, but without an order, without an agreed system, without a functioning international system. One of the side effects, of course, is that the multilateral system is broken and not doing anything very much for any of us. And the distinguishing feature for me today is that every great power is revisionist. Nobody likes this situation. Normally, you at least have one hegemon, somebody who's powerful, who's happy, who wants to keep things as they are, supports the status quo. And most periods. Today, there's nobody. Even the Americans talk of build back better. Better than what? Than what you see. Better means I don't like what's going on. And frankly, as Sanjoy reminded us, they have their own internal problems to sort out. Though I don't think that actually should worry us beyond a point, as I'll come to. But given this chaos that we see, what we saw in Ukraine, what we see, and the general desire across the board for another way out of this, because this is not the Cold War, this is not a bipolar world. Frankly, the Chinese and the Americans, if you think that's the principal contradiction, which it is, they need each other. Their economies can't survive without each other. And I think we tend to underestimate the level of dependence on the world of China. China still needs the world for food. She's the only major temperate country that cannot feed herself. She needs technology. I mean, you've just seen what happens. She needs energy. She hasn't been self-sufficient since 1993. And these are big dependencies on the rest of the world, which is why she's trying now to actually try and shape the world outside, using whoever she can. And the West has managed to push Russia into her arms. So now they will work together in tandem, as Raja reminds us. But what does that mean for the rest of us? Because there is a huge rest, and you saw the reaction to Ukraine's sanctions. Most of the world didn't want to have very much to do with it. It's primarily the West which imposed sanctions, but most of Asia, most of Africa, most of Latin America even, and countries who were very close to superpowers chose to assert their independence. Kazakhstan, in January, their government was saved by Russian military intervention. They co-sponsor the resolution which criticizes February 24th, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. That tells you something of the desire for agency and for another way. This is not non-alignment, no. And, you know, this is the trouble. We immediately go back to arguing by analogy, right? We find some example from the past and we say, here we go again. No. Because it's a completely different context. It's not a bipolar world. But what does it tell you? There's one opportunity there for you to work with a much broader range of countries than you might have in a Cold War bipolar world where everyone was stuck into blocks and where there are choices. There is demand out there and nobody's meeting it. And there's one opportunity. But where's the other opportunities? Crisis creates opportunities everywhere. South Asia is in crisis. In the last year and a half, 5 governments have changed, not all happily or willingly. At least 3 are now talking to the IMF for money because Sri Lanka has already defaulted. 2 have sort of administrative arrangements and understandings with the IMF, which still need to be approved, Pakistan, Sri Lanka. But even Bangladesh has approached the IMF for bridge funding. Others could be going the same way. So you have a crisis in South Asia. Here's your chance. You have, and you've taken it in Sri Lanka. You've worked with Sri Lanka. But here's your chance to actually, for me, the logical thing would be to say, we'll set up a payments arrangement in South Asia among ourselves. We will open markets and use this moment for the kind of economic integration that will stand you in good stead, create a peaceful periphery for you in the future between you and the neighbors. But that, for me, is an opportunity if you use this moment of crisis, because this is when people actually need you. You have a broader opportunity, which is created by the state of China-US contention, which is now structural, despite their dependence on each other. So they're like Siamese twins who are actually fighting with each other. But in that situation, the US has a strategic utility or need for you, given the state of your relationship with China. And a lot we have to ascribe of the improvement in India-US relations, we have to thank the Chinese for whatever, and I don't think that's what they intended, but that's where we are today. For us, the US is an essential partner, not only because of China, but the US is an essential partner for us if we want to transform India. The US is the only power which is a global power, which is actually present everywhere and can project power everywhere. China might be a global economic superpower, but she's still, in military terms, a regional or local power, whereas the US is not. And even in terms of technology, in terms of access to markets, as Raja reminded us, that's where we trade, that's where we sell our goods, that's where we get them from as well. So it makes sense. You have an opportunity here to rework your relationship, not just with the US, but with the entire West, which you didn't have before. And it's created by the crisis and by the fact that, frankly, they face hard economic times in the future. And I'm not talking about just day-to-day transactional opportunities, which we are not bad at taking, actually, when we buy Russian oil, when we manage to. These are things that we're not bad at all. But there is possibly, and this is much more questionable, there is possibly something that you need to be doing with the Chinese as well. If you think back to when did you get 20 years of peace, of the border staying roughly where it was, how did you get the 93 agreement, the 96 agreement, and that modus vivendi, which worked for a while and now no longer works, was broken in 2020. You got it because China, for their part, had just gone through Tiananmen, was going through a huge internal adjustment. Deng had to make that whole Southern Progress, etc., to get reform going again. Thought they were the last big communist country standing with a big regime change target on their back, that they might be the next target of US regime change. Soviet Union had just collapsed. So they did 93 with you. They didn't want to open another front. Today, China is going through a huge internal readjustment, a renegotiation of the economic and social contract. The political contract they don't want to touch. But there is a huge adjustment process going on in that. When Xi Jinping says common prosperity, when he starts reminding people that it's a dual circulation, it's his version of Atmanirbharta. And it's interesting. No miracle economy, whether it's Japan, Korea, Taiwan, has managed more than 40 years of fantastic growth, in fact 30 years in their cases, without then going through a very difficult adjustment period, much more difficult than anybody predicted. You look at Japan in the 90s, you look at the adjustment that they had to make, it's happened to each of them. And it could be that China's heading a similar thing, heading for a similar process, because demography, because of the world economy, for various internal reasons, that they can't do investment-led growth, etc. I leave the economics to Sanjay Joshi. If that is so, if there is, then you have an opportunity here then to actually see whether or not, and I'm not saying there's any guarantee, but you need to test the proposition of can you then actually use this to find a new level of modus vivendi where you learn to live with each other. No guarantees, but it's worth looking at it as a possibility and testing it. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But it's an opportunity, it seems to me, because things have changed. And they've changed fundamentally. And especially for the Chinese, they've changed in the last 2 years in ways that I don't think they certainly expected. So you have opportunities in these big relationships, but you also have opportunities in the other relationships. But all this depends on 3 or 4 things. I mean, you have to have a coherent external economic policy, because you can't walk on one leg. You need to, if you think you're going to play a political, diplomatic, military role outside, you have to be engaged economically. You can't say, I walk away from RCEP, I'm not going to be part of the trade leg of IPEF. Those are not choices you can make. You can't give with PLI what you take away by raising tariffs. So there's a whole, you have to actually sit and recalibrate the way you engage with this new world that you see out there. There are other things we want to do, but most of that, I think, is internal. I don't believe the myth that we are being told, either that history's arc is bending towards democracy, or that the East is rising and the West is declining, and that's inevitable. That's what we will be told, and it will be sold to us over and over again in order to get us to do what they want us to do. But I don't think that's necessary. As I said, for me, this is a moment where you can actually break out of past patterns and use the opportunities that are available. So I hope we all do that. Thank you. If we do that, we'll be doing what he has been saying for a long time.
Mr. Shiv Shankar Menon is, in my judgment, the guru on China. And he dealt with China, then he was ambassador there, he was earlier there. And then he dealt with China as the National Security Advisor. Well, he tried to mold the Chinese into the right way of thinking about India.
I have much to answer for.
No, I think you nearly succeeded, but we should have kept you there for another 10 years. Things would have changed. Now, after all that you have heard, what can I say? I had prepared some notes because it's a serious occasion. I don't read a speech, but I gave some thought to it. The subject first was, why is the world, what was the first topic you suggested? It's
The world through the eyes of Ambassador Rasgotra.
Anyway, the topic now is the world today. Now, I think I have the longest acquaintance of this world, looking at this audience here. I was born in 1924. And in my recollection, the world is going through an upheaval now. I think that was the reason for you to set this topic, the war in Ukraine. But in my recollection of things, the world has been, this very world, has been in one upheaval or another all this time. The biggest upheaval, in my understanding, was India's independence. It changed the world, it destroyed an empire and increased the UN membership from 45 to 85, following India's work in the UN. Now, so far as this war goes, I've given it a lot of thought. You know, you cannot teach good manners to great powers. How many wars have taken place and how have they ended? China invaded Vietnam, could not win the war, and sort of having declared victory, there was no victory there. They were beaten up. Good. They retreated. Then China invaded India. I think they succeeded in one purpose of the invasion was to humiliate Nehru, because Nehru's status in the world was something which Mao Zedong could not just digest. But China retreated. There was no victory. I think the Himalayas, snows, they knew would defeat them, and they made a hastiest retreat, I think, ever for a victory in defeat or retreat. Then America invaded. These are all great powers. China, now I'm coming to America. America invaded Vietnam, and they had to retreat in defeat. Then America, not learning from that experience, no, before I come to America, then Russia, another great power, superpower, invaded Afghanistan. And after labors of 10 years, not getting anywhere near victory, they retreated. Then America, not having learned anything from the story of Vietnam and their flight from there, got into Afghanistan again. And you know what happened recently. Was it victory or was it retreat? Now, as I said, you can't teach these great powers. But what is worse is, they don't even learn from their own experiences. Repeated invasions, repeated retreats. The lesson of this short history is that no matter how great your power, you invade a small country, if the people of that country love their freedom, love their country, love their liberty, and they are determined to defend it to death, then there is no alternative with the greatest of power, retreat. These are, in my judgment, great upheavals. There were seismic shifts taking place all this time. But the greatest seismic or tectonic shift in world politics and world economics came with the shift of epicenter of world politics and world economics from the west to the east, to Asia, which started happening actually with the Chinese Revolution, Indian independence, but it came into sort of solid shape in the 80s. I remember a discussion in Rajiv Gandhi's office about the world having changed. The world incidentally changes all the time. It changes every day. It's never the same world every morning. But these seismic shifts of power, economic power, military power, have caused commotion, caused problems, caused difficult. My reading, Ambassador Surendra Kumar, is this war in Ukraine is going to end as the other great power wars on smaller countries have ended in the past. Whether anybody can do anything to help Russia save its face, I don't know. Americans won't do anything. No great power is going to do anything. No great power has helped another great power. This uh, I hope you won't contradict me, Shankar. This 4 February treaty of no limits of relations between Russia and China is a fake thing. Russia is in a mess in Ukraine. China has not lifted a finger. Russia has run short of missiles. It has gone to North Korea. Probably in North Korea also. I mean, China is sending these missiles, one doesn't know. But this goes on, so we shouldn't worry too much about it. The unfortunate part is because of globalization of world economy, world politics, this little war in a small country in the neighborhood of Great Russia has caused ripples all over, food shortages, this, that, or the other, inflation, and rising prices, and so on and so forth. This is one aspect I thought I would present to you. Now, why did Russia attack Ukraine? Russian politics usually is very smart, very clever. They're good people, thoughtful people. They have long history behind them. Russia, for 1,000 years I can think of, was the biggest land power in European affairs. It was a European country. The Tsars then continued their advance in the east. It acquired Central Asian possessions and so on and so forth. It never really became a totally Asian country, though you and we have said it's a, Asian country also, because it suited us to say that. But essentially, it has been, for 1,000 years, a European country, and for 1,000 years or more, Crimea was a part of Russia. Now what happened? The Cold War ended, and certain promises were made to Russia, but contrary to those promises, the West, he kept advancing NATO to Russia's frontiers. I think they had taken possession of all the rest, but this little country, Ukraine, remained, and there were rumors that Ukraine might also join NATO. Russia got worried, naturally. Would Crimea, they'll be blocked out of Crimea? So they captured Crimea. I think that happened in 2014. That was a big event, bad thing for a great power to do, but I think it was a necessity for them. They felt it, they did that. The access to the oceans of the world, warm waters was from there. But if matters had rested there, probably I think things would not have gone further. But then to ensure that Crimea will remain a part of this country, they wanted the eastern part, those two provinces, where I think there are a lot of Russians, they say they are majority of the population, but who can distinguish between a Ukrainian and a Russian? Is it possible, Ambassador? There you are. Nevertheless, they invaded. Now, the history I gave you, if a great power attacks a small country, other great power, one or more, will come to the rescue of the smaller country. So the NATO, America, with all their latest sophisticated arm, they have armed the whole country to impose what looks like a defeat of Russia. Russia has already withdrawn from Kharkiv area. And I think, I said to myself when I read this news, that the beginnings of a retreat have started. It will have to be a retreat. as friends of Russia, you tell me, can we help them in this in a dignified way? Can we step in to say, come on, Mr. Putin, make a gesture? I thought there's probably one gesture we can make. We have fought shy of telling him that you have done something wrong, stop the war, end it. Our foreign minister, as a matter of policy, has been developing not an alliance, but special relations with a lot of middle powers. France is one of them, Indonesia is another. There are so many of them, a group of 30, 40. He has been focusing on those and developing good relations. And I think somebody in the government of India should bring them together and decide on a diplomatic démarche with Putin to tell him you have achieved your purpose. Now you say you are going out. And we'll all support your retreat or dignified return from this war theater. I think there was some Chinese mischief behind this war. The China-Russia treaty was signed on February 4. 20 days later, on the 24th, Putin invades the country. What happened in that meeting in Beijing? Now, Chinese mind, as you know, is a very crooked mind. Am I right? They signed this treaty. They were under pressure. They're feeling the pressure of American-Indian relationship deepening. And they wanted somehow this pressure off. And what best way of getting the Americans, NATO, engaged against Russia? And succeeded. So, how long will this treaty endure, last? How much more mischief will China perpetrate on its so-called friend Russia? I was shocked to see a statement by Stoltenberg, he is the Secretary General of NATO. He was talking in Canada. He got very worried and he told the Canadians to worry and the world to worry because he said, here my notes have become irrelevant now, that Russia is building new naval military bases equipped with the latest weapons, including supersonic missiles, all along their northern coast. Now, I happen to know the Russians have been doing it for the last 25 years. And why are they doing it? Because they suspect China's intentions. China, Mr. Menon, has developed a navy of 400 ships, several submarines. Where are they going to deploy it? They are preventing by geography to enter the Indian Ocean. And I think our Navy and our defense people are in the process of setting up their own bases on the Indian Ocean periphery. There are other navies present here, American Navy is present, British are present, the French Navy is present. These are all Indian Ocean power. Who is going to let China in to the Indian Ocean as a naval power? As a peaceful country, the commerce, trade, these other things, then there is no problem. In the, now they have, of course, the South China Sea and North China Sea. I don't think that the seas, those little seas are big enough for 400 strong navy, 400 ship strong navy. And China's navy will be blocked out of the Pacific Ocean by the strong American presence there. So China for years has been eyeing to infiltrate into northeastern Siberian part of Russia. Lot of people have actually Chinese settled there. About 15 years ago, I think 15, 16 years ago, I paid several visits to Russia after retirement. I met the chairman of the Russian Senate, and he said to me that these Chinese are determined to take over this part of Russia. Your people have gone and settled in the frozen areas of Canada and turned them into green fields. Can India do this here? I came back here and I reported the matter to the government of the day, and the honorable minister, I won't name him, he said to me, Mr. Rasgotra, इसका तो एक ग्रुप बनाना चाहिए. मैंने कहा जी मैं तो कुछ भी नहीं हूँ, मैं तो अपना काम करता हूँ. इनके नीचे ORF में ग्रुप, ये मैं आपके लिए मैसेज लाया हूँ. This needs further exploration at the level of ambassador and so on and so forth, and with the meeting then we proceed further. Well, the government changed. Those were the era of those temporary governments, short-lived governments, and no one heard of it. So we left it at that. Now I think I'll skip a lot. I think what is the world today is, as I said, topsy-turvy world, but this will settle down. The future beckons me. It's going to be very interesting future. Russians have decided that they are going to be blocked out of the Atlantic. The entry via Crimea into the Mediterranean may become difficult or impossible. So what are they to do? But they have decided to become a big naval power. And they are great shipbuilders. They build, we have ships from them, we have a carrier from them, we have nuclear submarines. So China and Russia, two naval powers, in my judgment, are going to clash at some time or the other. Whether it takes 10 years, 20 years, not more than that. I think within 25 years, this will happen. Because you have built a huge navy, you have to put it somewhere, they'll try to put in some Russian port, try to borrow it, try to hire it, rent it and so on. So they are not going to get it. Russians are very, very suspicious of these people. There is no love lost between them. For February treaty or no treaty. Treaties are a thing of convenience for Russia. They can be, for China, they can be broken. They made so many treaties. You know those, the 90s. And where are those treaties now? So we are heading for, this war will settle down. I give it another 6 months. It has gone on for 6 months. Only I think the American war in Vietnam went on for longer. This cannot go on for too long. Putin would not like to see the collapse of his country's feet. I think he'll be looking out for some excuse. And we are good friends of Russia. We should provide the kind of initiative that I suggested, or there are other ways of helping them out in this situation. So the future remains as full of potential tectonic shifts. What will happen then this scenario develops? And develop it will, because this navy has to be used. It cannot go through Bering Strait. Russia will block it there, or United States, Alaska will block it there. It cannot come to Indian Ocean. Its only possibility is they make a thrust for the Arctic Circle. They are building a huge icebreaker. So for a time they'll be busy breaking the ice and building the bases there. But ultimately, if these two great powers with two great navies are there cheek by jowl, I think that the world is in trouble. But it will be far away trouble, I think. Fortunately, India is located this way. Now, in all this, what is Indian foreign policy? I think it's a good policy, what a combination of Prime Minister Modi's initiative vis-a-vis United States of America. He broke the ice because he was himself banned at one time, but when he went there, he embraced the president embraced back, and we are, well, good, jolly good fellows. Huh? Yeah. We have two goals, if I understand this government's plans. One is to become a great economic and military power, and to, by 1947, declare ourselves a developed country. Now, how are we going to become a developed country? Look at the state of our technology. We have certain sectors in which we are very good, and the world is using our technologies, but we need frontier technologies in our arms sector, in other sectors, transport sectors, and so on and so forth. Who is going to give it to us? Putin doesn't have it, obviously, you can see. Chinese don't have it, they're not going to give us anyway, and the Chinese, I think, Chinese power is overrated. One provocation after another, while this war was going on in the West, and America was totally engaged there, but American House Speaker decides to visit Taiwan. What did the Chinese do? They threw up some fireworks, missiles. What these missiles, were they for domestic purposes? Because Xi is going to face this Congress, and you hear rumblings that there are some opposition to it, but I think he'll make it. Then that story ended. Then the Americans sent another delegation. This time there were not even these fireworks. Then the third provocation, one of their ministers came there, and the minister was connected with defense relations. So, I'm not saying that China is no power at all. I think it's still too good a power for us, that we have to develop our power. And one country, I think, which can help us with the requisite technology, latest weapons, that is United States of America. Not many people know. I mean, government of India has been very shy of, exposing these truths. When the confrontation developed on the northern frontier, they gave us all kinds of help. Satellite intelligence to begin with, uniforms for our troops, warm tents for our troops, weapons, helicopters, and what are those other things that fly around these things? Drones. The latest. And the Chinese saw American planes flying around, American satellites going over this area, and they thought wisdom was the better part of valor. So that is where we stand now. China, so far as India is concerned, is a threat, and it's a long-term threat. This is not going to end till we match up their economic strength, which I think India is going to do. It can, it has the potential. I was reading some economic accounts. We are in the range of 7% growth, 7 to 8% growth. The report said that 9% growth is possible, not immediately, but maybe in 2 years' time. So by 2047, we are a $3.5 trillion economy now. $5 trillion, which is Prime Minister Modi's objective, I think will be reached another 2 years, maybe 3 years. Possibly in his third term. I think he's going to get it. Regardless what anybody else says. Political facts are there to see. What is this? Sonal Mansin. Where is Sansi? A lot of my past girlfriends. So where is Sonal Mansin sitting here?
They are in the bar,
You gone?
the other room.
There's a lot of lovely girls here, beautiful audience. I'm delighted. Look at the smiling lady there. So, we need alliances are out of style, out of fashion these days, but we have a defense cooperation agreement with the United States. It was signed when President Obama came here. It has been nicely tucked away somewhere, but defense cooperation is taking place. Whatever we want from them, they are giving to us. This is my information. If anybody knows better, he can contradict me. Alignment, non-alignment was mentioned. Non-alignment is dead. The conflict is not, I don't think there should be conflict between Russia and United States of America. Russia will never go to war with America. United States will tease Russia, trouble Russia, make Russia expend its wealth and arms, but it is never really attacked. So, but China you don't know. China can do any sort of thing at any time. We should deepen our relationship with the United States of America. Sometimes I worry because the government, you see, making too much of France. France is good to cultivate these middle powers. And France is, in a limited sector, an alternative for the supply of jet fighters and so on and so forth. So is Britain, so is Italy, so are a number of other countries. For trade, it's good to have a banding together of these middle powers. But only real support, technological arms that we need for the next 25 years can come from that country. Therefore, we should not risk a sort of cooling off of America. I've spent 10 years in America, over 3 posts. I'm studying that country all the time because it's a very important country to study, and a very interesting one too. I've never seen what is happening today. The Senate has drafted a resolution. The House of Representatives has passed a resolution which says no sanctions on India because of those missiles we bought from Russia, number one. Number two, give India the latest technologies, not only F-18, F-16 is out, F-18, F-35, whatever they want, whatever we decide they need to deal with manage China's threat. Strange things are happening. The latest technology, 5G, this G, that G, it's all listed there in the House resolution. Now the two committees will get together. They're more or less the same. The numbering of the things that instruction to Defense Secretary, Defense Department, that all these things should be given to India. I hope they'll be given free of charge, because they're very expensive things. I have actually suggested to the Americans and to our own government that we should ask for Lend-Lease arrangement while we deal with this crisis for the next 10 years or so. They have not, neither side has reacted yet, but we leave it at that. Now, this is a relationship which is number one. But this is not to say that we drop Russia. Russia is going to be an important country. Once this, what they are doing in the northern coast, in about 5-10 years, it will be a very, very important ocean-going power. And this is a power which will ultimately, I think, stop China. So we should keep up with our relationship, whether Americans like it. I think, well, I shouldn't say whether Americans like it or they don't like it. But the major task of Indian diplomacy today is to explain all these necessities of India, the complications in the international scene, and ask them to pipe down. Let us do our thing with the Russians. They are worried that whatever technology they gave us, it will somehow from our channels go to Russia. It hasn't happened in the last 50 years, and it's not going to happen again. We keep our secrets to, even our own secrets, to very close to our chest. What you were doing, I didn't know. What I was doing as Foreign Secretary, the next man didn't know. Under instruction, we've taken an oath to maintain secret quality of almost anything that is marked confidential or secret in the government of India. Anyway, I shouldn't make fun of our government. I was part of it. So much for America and Russia. And China. China, I think we have to prepare ourselves, build up our strength further on the northern frontier and on a permanent basis, because you can't trust them. And you develop your naval power. Okay, and I think if a major attack takes place from China, we should capture in the Indian Ocean a couple of their ships carrying oil, and the war will come to an end at once. A war can't be fought in sectors. We have been fighting ours in sectors, only in the northern sector, only in the northeast of Ladakh, not in, when they give us trouble in the northeast of Ladakh, if we have the strength on the border in the east, we should go in 10 kilometers and then see what happens. Then negotiation will take place. The bickering going on, they have come into this the plain area, Depthang Plateau. It's an open area, it's very close to our approach to the Karakoram Pass. They have to get out of there. There, I think, our foreign minister has done a wonderful job. The state of relations with China will be reflected, and the state of the border will reflect in state of relations between China. And I was very interested. He's a very thoughtful man, original thinker like you are. He had given a 7-point charter, all focused on China. Is there time, Ambassador? Can I read it out?
It's your day, sir.
No, it's a very interesting document. It's not very long, it's short. I hope I have it here. I've forgotten. Come on. External Affairs Minister, the 7 points, China policy. Number 1, the state of the border will determine the state of India-China relations. He made this declaration of 7 points in a talk to the Asia Society recently. There was an inaugural function there. Number 2, ties must be based on 3 mutuals: mutual sensitivity, mutual respect, and mutual interest. Number 3, sovereignty and integrity have to be respected. Number 4, regional initiative have to be consultative. This is a very important point. Not unilateral. Connectivity in particular should be transparent, viable, and market-based. This BRI, which has ruined Pakistan, is about to ruin Sri Lanka, which Bangladesh finally, with a wise leader, they have rejected BRI. And they have advised others, be warned, China's purpose is to put you under debt, which they very successfully done with our neighbor Pakistan. I don't think Pakistan can go to any war now with India. $65 billion debt. They are trying in Africa, but I think there also people have woken up. And now I hear at the forthcoming Congress, where she will be given a 3rd term, it is said, he will be given a 3rd term, 2 new proposals are coming. GDI, Global Development Initiative. They have not consulted anybody about it. But it's the Global Development Initiative of China. So it will, I think, meet the same fate as BRI is meeting. Another one is Global Security Initiative. Who has authorized them to develop global security? India has its own thinking on its own security. America has its own. Europe has its own. Even Russia has its own. But they are doing these things. It is a fantasy world. You tell me, I mean, is she all right here? Well, gentlemen, only last point I want to make is that this government, this country, should always be ready to engage in talks with a country like Pakistan. I don't believe in this slogan, neighbors first. Which neighbor will be first? Sri Lanka? You tell me. NSA? Pakistan? Which neighbor? Nepal? Of all countries. They are hand in glove with China now. They've even kicked up shindy about a hyped up border dispute, which hasn't been there for the 200 years. I dealt with it. There is no dispute on this. But under Chinese advice, they have done it. So my advice to government is, go gentle with neighbors without zeal. Raja Mohan, can you convey this message? They read your articles, I believe. Go gentle with neighbors with zeal. Pakistan is a neighbor, we have to live with it. I think they are in 2 minds just now. Talk to India now. They need our vegetables, they're going to need grain, they're going to need 1,000 things. Poor chaps, they've been hurt very badly. It's a terrible flood. I don't wish that on any country, not even on China. China is being looked after by God Almighty now. Corona, we got rid of. Corona has disappeared from the rest of the world, but it's flared up in China now. So many towns are under lockdown, Delhi. Well, I wish them good luck. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. This has been much awaited words of wisdom. I think this time, as they say in Hindi, bhookhe bhajan hoy gopala. So we will skip, maybe if you permit, question answer. You want to, I think we should, question answer session we can skip, because Some guests are waiting. You have been wonderful, wonderful audience. Listen so patiently. When I do function without Rasgotra, half of them start going 7:30 onward. And by the time we come 8:30, there are only 10% left. But you have stayed on. That means there's something which you have been waiting for, something which you will cherish. And I must thank all our great panelists. From here, Sanjay Joshi ji, spare time, he goes around so many places. We have our friend Shankar Menon, he has so many commitments in India and abroad. And Professor Raja has so many hats. Actually, I had put about 6, 7 those designations under his name, and he said, no, please cut it out and put it only fellow and, and columnist. I say strategic thinker and writer and author and all that. So, once again, thank you all for coming. And thank you, sir, for giving such wonderful insight as you see the world, how it's turning out. And I'm sure we will all remember. And I'm sure Raja will use at least part of it in his next, and maybe some others will. I had some friend here, I don't know, they have come and gone. Is Mr. Mujib Mashal here? Hello, is my friend from New York Times. Have you been provoked enough to ask something, but we have no question answer session next time. Okay, thank you very much. Good night.